All right, hello, welcome to the Modern Thought Room. My name is Jethro. This episode is going to be about better understanding the outcomes of decisions by going back and studying or breaking down the structure of the key argument or arguments that led to whatever decision was taken. All right, so we all have a lot of decisions we make, and behind every decision is one driving narrative, we call it, but really that narrative is anchored by an argument, and every argument has a structure to it. Better understanding that structure will then help you have a bit more confidence going into decision making, and also safeguard those involved or those that may face consequences to decisions or actions taken. Okay, so fundamentally, an argument is a statement or series of statements, premises, designed to support or prove a conclusion. So, one more time, an argument is a statement or series of statements, premises, designed to support or prove a conclusion, right? And we'll look at two of the kind of ways that you can loosely assess an argument. So, I learned this when I was in undergrad. I took a philosophy 101 class, and that was my first introduction to argument structure, right? Before that, the closest I think, and I think on average, most common way people learn about argument structure is through learning things like the 5 paragraph essay method, which is a whole course in its own, really, and persuasive writing, argumentative writing, and these types of things, right? Before you get to sort of like the collegiate level, or if you went to a school that offered certain types of courses, you might already have known that in high school, which is a very good thing, right? So unfortunately, I was not one of those people that knew of argument structure in high school in an intentional way. I had a concept of what was persuasive, what flowed, what worked, what wasn't contradictory, etc., right? So if you take like a 5 paragraph essay format, right, you have your first paragraph, which has an introduction, and if your teacher's real serious, they kind of get you to include like a thesis statement type of in there. You have your body paragraphs that are supporting, right? They're supporting the thesis or the intro, and then the summary or the revisiting happens in that fifth paragraph. And if you were really confident about what you were saying, you threw in a counter argument in there, right? That's the main way, I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe that's the main way that folks learn about argumentative structure, right? Now, what's different about it, though, is as you get up there, your education increases, and your work, the level of work that you're supposed to be responsible, or that you are responsible for, increases, and expectations increase, and therefore arguments become a bit more nuanced, right? Arguments become a bit more nuanced, and the slight differences, right, are the things that make big differences. Why? Because, for example, if you make shoes, and you're producing shoes off of one key insight, someone can make something very similar to what you're making with a slight adjustment off of the fact that I have this slight insight in a different direction, and I can build a case around it and go to market with a different shoe model, shoe sock color, shoe laces color, what have you, right? So endless. So all that to say, right? Um, the important thing about this is that there are kind of two ways to assess arguments, right? There may be many more folks that do this professionally. That's a different note, right? It's either an argument is valid or an argument is sound, and they are interrelated in a way, right? So if an argument is valid, right, that means the conclusion logically follows from the premises, assuming the premises are true. So once again, if an argument is a valid argument, that means the conclusion where they arrive follows from the premises that they set up. So somebody can be arguing something based on how they stacked the points they were making, you can see how they got to the conclusion that they got to. The issue is one of those premises may contain a falsehood which invalidates the argument. But you understand in terms of framing and how they think, yes, they did logically put these things together. Right. So an example, forgive me for the example, it's really, basic and dramatic in a way. All mammals can fly. That's the first premise. Whales are mammals. That's the second premise. Conclusion. Therefore, whales can fly. Right. So let's run that back. All mammals can fly. Whales are mammals. Therefore, whales can fly. Right. The first premise is wrong. Right. All mammals cannot fly. Bears are mammals. They can't fly. Right. But the structure is, in a way, correct. Right. First point establishes a thing about mammals, that they can fly. Second thing establishes a type of mammal, whales. Conclusion merges them, bridges them together to give you a takeaway that you should, go and run with. But in this case, you shouldn't run with it. Right. So that's an example of something that's valid. Now, a sound argument, it's valid and all the premises are actually true. So a sound argument is one where it not only is valid in that the structure is correct, but it is sound in that all of the pieces of the structure are correct, or the premises are all correct. Right. So here's an example. Premise one: all planets in our solar system orbit the sun. Okay. Premise two: Earth is a planet in our solar system. Okay. Conclusion: therefore, the Earth orbits the sun. All right. So premise one: all planets in our solar system orbit the sun. Premise two: Earth is a planet in our solar system. And then conclusion: therefore, the Earth orbits the sun. All right. We all followed that one. I'm not going to harp on that too much. I kind of just kicked the camera a little bit. All right. We're good. So this was kind of just setting up what I want to get to. All right. So thank you. The thing and where a lot of us end up kind of in situations where we have a decision to make, we make the decision, and then it may not play out the way we wanted to. And so we're there in a way trying to reevaluate what went wrong, right? And depending on how our mind works, that will impact greatly how we arrive at the main culprit. All right. So the main thing I want to say in this moment is that the distance, and please, if you're a note taker, at least write this part down of all things. The distance between the last premise and the conclusion represents a huge window that, in the grand scheme of things, you want to shorten that as much as possible, right? You don't want to be taking leaps. So you want to be very mindful of that, right? You want to be mindful of where the last premise stops and where the conclusion arrives, right? So that's always a place I say, always go and investigate that, because it's a lot easier to, from the very beginning, start with solid, correct premises, and then when you go to make that final conclusion, it might represent a leap or jump, right? So somebody, like colloquially, folks would say that's a reach, right? You might have had tenets of your argument might have been, let me not mix up those words. Tenets of your arguments might have been set up in a way that's valid, but the jump to the conclusion represented something that made them no longer sound, right? So that's something that's very important. It's something I actually want to add on to that I'm blanking on, in that conflict, in that window of the conflict right there. So if you come back to me, I'll get back to that. But that's very important with just as you're thinking about, okay, where did this go wrong? I started off right, and then I got to this place at a conclusion, and I didn't like the results. Now, why I say why I say specifically the last premise to the conclusion, although there could be other premises there that cause the issue. This is the point that I wanted to remember, is that when you're starting off wrong or in error, there are things that you'll come up against earlier on, ideally, that'll signal to you that you're off track already before you can get to the place where you've made a final conclusion and then start to act on it by making a decision. If you're, and then in the context also is, I'm talking to like people that are professionals, right? So you've already done a certain amount of schooling, you've done a certain amount of work to have a certain amount of experience. So you either have the knowledge or the experience or the book smarts, street smarts, whatever combination, you coming in already, quote unquote, a professional in what you're doing, right? Now, as a person that's serious, you'll know if you start off a little shaky, because as you're trying to build, you'll run into opposition, you'll run into conflicts that are telling you something's off, something's not working, right? Now, what makes it difficult is by the time you've arrived at something where you could say, okay, this is my last major thing I'm looking for to complete this before I go and make that decision or arrive at my conclusion, right? There's a lot of extra pressure that be going on. There might be things that are outside of your hands. There might be stipulations. There might be confines. There might be a host of things that don't give you the power to go and act, right? And one of the things I think people do is, when that happens, you realize, hey, my hands were tied. This is how we ended up playing this out. I had an idea that it would have played out like this. Anytime you tell somebody, yeah, I knew it would play out like this, what that really means is I saw an error earlier on before we made the final point, the final conclusion, and took action, right? And that's normal. There's going to be some of that. But the reason why it's important to, if you don't, to sit down here and there and get your mind back to thinking about arguments systematically and how they drive and influence the decisions you ultimately make or are part of, is that, and this is my way of thinking about it, but I think it has broader applications to your context, is that it safeguards folks that are either immediately impacted by or indirectly influenced by or impacted by, the outcomes of decisions, right? So if I know I need to make a decision on something, I need to take action, and I need a guide, I need an argumentative guide, right? If I see that I'm being handed one, like you're in a situation, you're working with others, they give you a loaded hand, and you're like, here's how it could fall out. Now, because I know how it might fall out, I can already start moving against it. Sometimes you gotta protect yourself like that. People will set you up. And by set you up, I don't mean like in a like, losing your life type of way. So, let's slow down there. I don't wanna, get things blurred. But I mean maybe professionally, in a context where the end goal is to maybe do something better, is to get a better result, earn more money, what have you, right? And you're handed a situation that you have to handle. And and as long as you can already start to see and break down what the potential outcomes could be, that puts you in a place to then move against it early, even if your hands are tied and you just have to follow out the order because that's where your rank is. I don't make all the rules. I don't make any of the rules. Matter of fact, I follow the rules to the best of my ability, right? But sometimes you got to know what the rules are there for and how you need to safeguard yourself by preparing for the outcome. The best way to prepare for the outcome is understanding what's the driver. What's the driver? some type of narrative, some type of story, some type of argument or series of arguments that most likely, because we're humans, we're all, not perfect, there will be a slither, a piece, a moment that you can kind of point to and say, let me earmark this, bookmark this, so that when things play out, I already know how to react and kind of use that to kind of put myself in a good place for the outcome, right? So think about when you're arguing with a friend. um they might make a good point, might make a second good point, and they're going they're going about it, and maybe sometimes they started off with objective points, now they're moving into subjective points, and now you guys are arguing about something, and then now you're off track, don't even remember how the argument started. And so you're like, man, like, why can't they get that you can't say, excuse me, you can't make this point, and then leap all the way to this conclusion. So for example, I'm more of a soccer person, but I follow basketball as a casual. But I have a good friend of mine. This guy loves basketball, and he gets upset with me when I make super casual takes. Right? He's like, "Oh man, like how you saw this, this, that, and then now you're just concluding this." And I'm like, "Yeah, man. Sometimes I do it just to get a rise out of him. It's hilarious to me." But what he's saying, in fact, is, "Yo, bro, I know your background, your capability. How come you're connecting these dots in such an erroneous way? It's not helpful, and it doesn't contribute anything good for all of us, right?" And then we'll slow down, and I'll be like, "Yeah, bro, I feel what you're saying." We'll go back and forth, and I'll hear some of his takes. And just because somebody's just because somebody, they're coming with you, like your argument is wrong, doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. You got to also know how to counter and pick apart what they're saying as well, right? Balance. But that was just an example of like, hey, every day you're coming across these types of things in social, personal, professional type of ways. That what it does, though, it helps you have some type of grounding and room to maneuver when you are stepping back and viewing things in the argumentative structure that they are presented to you. All right. So emotions ideally shouldn't be brought into decisions, and, well, let me not say decisions, because that could actually be a lie. But when forming arguments, right, or drawing conclusions, let me say drawing conclusions, because I think that will land on people's ears a little bit better. When you go into drawing conclusions, right, in a professional setting, ideally emotions should not be, you know, stirred into that pot. Now, emotions and things that make factors subjective are still valid and important, but the objective part is that you are objectively considering the role of emotion, subjectivity, and things like that, right? But we all know that's not how things work. You know, that's just, and I don't necessarily say anybody's really mad at that. I don't think anybody's necessarily mad at that. It's just like, hey, you know, it is what it is. But when the subjectivity starts getting in there a little too much, that's when people are like, oh, no wonder we've made 3, 4, 5 bad decisions on the trot. Why? Because at a point where things should have been stacked and weighed objectively, we sprinkled in some of the feelings and subjective perspective biases. We sprinkled some of that in there, and it threw things off course. If you know that you're dealing with something that's very emotional, very personal, very, very close to the chest, that's a whole compartment in the argument that you need to account for. But the way that it imposes itself on the full journey to conclusion isn't something that should just be isn't something that should be non-objective. All right. So in a professional context, right, you have a good amount of internal selling to do, and various um, kind of, sort of needs for that, right? Now, depending on the size of the team, the level of the systems and the hierarchical structure of, the company you're working for, the business that you're running, however you run your systems or whatever systems you're embedded in, right? Internal selling is a necessity, and in order to do that well, you will need to have key arguments that drive whatever persuasive angle you're going at, or you're using, right? So when that's not present, folks won't folks won't be so open and receptive to even beneficial things that you have. You might have something that you notice, you guys are a team, maybe a team of 10, and you see a weakness that could be addressed without going in and dropping, tens of thousands of dollars, but just takes a little bit of sweat equity, and people can get a big impact from that. If you don't have the right pitch for that to the people that it matters to internally, it might not get picked up in that cycle. It might not get picked up for a while, and then you guys might find yourself back at that intersection again, where you need to fix the same problem a year later. And that happens. You can't fix all the problems, but as somebody that is trying to remain competitive, right? Somebody that's trying to always make a contribution, always trying to identify opportunity. These are things that you need to always be able to do, and do it quickly, and also have a mind for arguing the case for in a way that is convincing, right? And also being able to spot where the potential pitfalls are, because we live in a very competitive time, and things are only going to get more competitive. So it definitely is an important thing. We all have a, latent understanding of argumentative structure, but taking some time to kind of bring that back up to the surface for it to be a way that you assess things, I think will be very beneficial, and without a doubt will put you in a position where you feel a bit more, not only confident, but more prepared for what's down the road, right? And I think that's a very important thing in a position to be in, where you can make a case for something, see that it's gone another way, know where the potential issue is, and already be moving against it. That'd be a good place to be at, right? So, might be a good place to stop. I got a couple other notes here, but don't know if it's necessarily worth adding. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'll say this. I will include this because I think it's actually one of the more obvious ways that we see this play out, and we can all, I think, connect with this, right? So let's take trends. Right. We've all seen brands that have misappropriated trends. Maybe the trend wasn't a trend for them and what their services or products are about, but they saw it was a popular thing, and so they wanted to hop on that bandwagon to benefit from the sort of the popular opinion, or the popular energy, or the support for a trend, or the eyes or attention on the trend, right? So say that. So a trend pretty much says that a certain amount of people are supporting or promoting something in a way that can be curated to a easily identifiable trait, or style, or mode, or format, what have you, right? So a trend is something a whole bunch of people are doing, right? It's where things are moving, right? Now, a trend is the result of premises that force or promote a particular action. So say the trend is here. Before the trend has arrived, premises were stacking, boom, brings you to the trend, right? And people will go and try to understand the trend. They'll say, oh, well, these are the things that I think are the main factors that have brought us to this point of trend. Folks that are pressed for time don't want to necessarily pay respect to the premises. They'll say, let's just apply this trend and not factor in how the premises relate or impact where we're coming from, our identity, and our product or services, right? And that's when we see it all the time. You know, a company saw a trend, they used it, it didn't really land. People were like, why did we even why do we even have to sit through this to see them? They could have just done something else, right? I think a couple of years ago, authenticity was a big thing, right? Um, it's not, I don't think it's as big of a conversation now, but it's still true, right? Brands establishing an identity, authenticity is really important. And sometimes being slow to jump on trend is actually beneficial if it's understood why you're doing it, right? If there's a panic, like, hey, we need to do this, we need to do this, right? And the motivation or the premises behind it are not, the ones for you. There could be a lot of misguided effort placed and time lost ultimately. So that's one area I think a lot of us see this happening, and it's going to continue happening because sometimes folks don't have the time or willingness to pay respect to the premises that contribute to a conclusion that ultimately drives the decision that folks have made and want to make. Right. But that's not what we want to do. And that's not what you want to do. Right. You want to make sure that you have in your mind at all times a respect for premises, right? Context is really important. Context is probably one of the things I harp on for a long time, because context is one of those things when you're like entrenched, you can really get misguided about what the context is of a thing, and especially if you got to make a decision with speed. Whereas when you have been actively working on something, you have the opportunity to just step back and assess it. Context starts to show you where, there might be some pitfalls, there might be some mistakes, there might be some premises that don't necessarily add up, and there might be some falsehoods sprinkled in. Right. So leave a comment, right, if this is something that you realized at a certain point that you needed to do differently, right? So if you've been part of a team for a while, you've been sort of in your own lane professionally for a while, whatever your background. But if you've noticed, there were a series of decisions made. We had a faulty, we misinterpreted an insight or a piece of data because of how we wanted to ladder up things to one ultimate conclusion. If you notice that, hey, some of that was going on and I realized I need to do something differently about it, drop a comment about that circumstance. Other people I think will benefit from it. We'll all benefit from it. I'll benefit from it as well. But hope you found this helpful. Any questions, things you would like for me to delve into a little bit more or circle back to, again, leave that in there and I'll do my best. Ciao, peace, adios.